Thank you, Chair. The meeting is now live. Just to say, if you join the Teams meeting, could you mute your laptop? Thank you very much.
Good morning and welcome to the Joint Waste Disposal Board meeting here in Bracknell. The first item on the agenda is the election of chair, and I will turn that over to Lizzie. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So are there any, as this is the annual general meeting, are there any nominations for chair for the meeting for the remainder of the municipal year?
I nominate Councillor Rowland.
Thank you very much. Is that seconded?
I'll second, thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Over to you then, Councillor Rowland.
Thank you very much. And on to item 2, the appointment of vice chair. Do we have any nominations for vice chair? Yes.
I'll nominate Councillor Ian Shenton.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder? Thank you. Ian Shenton has been duly appointed as vice chair. Do we have apologies for absence, please?
Yes, Chair. We've had apologies from Councillor Helen Purnell. I think that's all, unless there's any others.
Thank you. Are there any others? No? Okay. Declarations of interest. Item 4, members are asked to declare any disposable pecuniary or affected interest in respect of any matter to be considered at this meeting. I will read this out. Any member with a disclosable pecuniary interest in a matter should withdraw from the meeting when the matter is under consideration, should notify the Democratic Services Officer in attendance. Any member with an affected interest in a matter must disclose that interest to the meeting. There is no requirement to withdraw from the meeting when the interest is only an affected interest, but the monitoring officer should be notified of that interest. Thank you. Are there any interest? There being none, okay, we will proceed on. Item 5, urgent items of business. Do members have any urgent items they wish to bring forward?
None notified to me, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. I would just like to call members, board members' attention and officers to the note from Bracknell Forest Executive Director with responsibility for Democratic Services that was sent out on the 16th of September. And to note that we will be, within all reasonableness, obviously complying with this. I think that as Democratic elected members, we all have an interest in running things efficiently, properly, ensuring that we have given clear instruction in front of the public to the actions and to the items that we need to clear out. The other thing in remembering that too is that we are ultimately a board made up of 3 separate councils. And we strive, obviously, to work together as a unit, even though, obviously, we each come with our own respective councils that we have to make the case for. But ultimately, we need to get along, and this is and work as one. And so this is the consideration that I hope we'll all consider, and we will at all times try to be respectful. And there we go. So I just wanted to make sure that we're all clear on that. Thank you very much. So, on to item 6, the minutes of the meeting of the last Joint Waste Disposal Board. Members, do we have any comments to those minutes? Yes, Councillor Kerr.
Thanks. It's just a small thing, but under item 36, which is the trial collection of flexible plastic packaging, I know that in the content of the minutes of this item, it mentions the request that was made by Wokingham Borough Council regarding the use of single-use plastic bags to enable this, and I request that for the stage 2 rollout of this trial that we look for alternative means. It wasn't actually minuted in the resolved section as a direct action, and my request is that is corrected, because it was an action that we asked to happen, please. Thank you.
I can take that back. I would suggest we add an action to the minutes itself, but I can look into whether we can add it to the results section. That's good.
Are we agreed with that? And are there any other corrections that anyone wants to bring forward? Okay, if not, we can go ahead and I will approve those minutes and we will carry. So this morning, we have got at item 7, the presentation from Rory Bryan, General Manager of RE3, and that is a verbal report. So over to you on that, Rory Bryan.
Chair, I'm just going to give Rory a quick introduction. So Rory is the General Manager for our contractor FCC, and Rory's come here to speak to us today to set up a couple of items of important business for the board and for the partnership, but also have links to reports that you'll be receiving later in the day. So there's obviously cost pressures in terms of waste management. It's a high cost service, so we're going to be talking about that. And there are some strong links to climate change, and then a briefing on the risk from fires from something that the board has been very interested in the past about waste batteries, and particularly vapes and disposable vapes. So I'll hand over to Rory now.
Brilliant, thank you very much. So my presentation is up on the screen. Hopefully you can see that. So I'm going to cover a couple of things, as Oliver mentioned. One of them is about some historical waste composition analysis that was undertaken, and actually about some new composition analysis that we're currently undertaking, and then what that means for the councils. We're going to talk a little bit about some high-level kind of next steps to achieving zero landfill. And then a current issue that is prevalent within the industry, and particularly within RE3, is about fires, which are predominantly caused by vapes and batteries within waste, which shouldn't be there. So hopefully that should catch up, yeah. So just a kind of recap on some waste composition analysis that we've done historically, and I think for those of you that weren't here when we've done this actually involved selecting a number of collection rounds from the 3 different council areas, which covered off all of the areas within the 3 councils, all the different demographics. And that waste was then physically sampled, or a proportion of that was physically sampled, and then it was broken down into categories saying exactly what was in that waste. So this is residual waste, or put in the black bins, and we split out what could be recycled and what shouldn't have actually been in there. We then took those percentages and those tonnages and we applied it to the council's waste flow forecast, which is basically a forecast of how many tonnes the councils are going to collect from the curbside. We then put those percentages to that tonnage, and what that gave us then was a list of tonnages and percentages that were within the residual waste that shouldn't have actually been in there. We then applied that to the rates that were received for selling of recyclates and the contract weights for if these materials were in the correct container and they were recycled. And what you can see is the table there at the bottom left shows actually the figures that the councils could have achieved if they got 100% of that material from the residual waste and it was put in the right containers. Now, we're not saying for a moment that that's fully achievable, but this was just for demonstrative purposes, saying actually what savings could the council achieve if they were to get all of that material out of there. So what you can see there is it's broke down to a couple of things. If the materials was in the right container, there's £3.3 million worth of savings to the councils in terms of the disposal contract. And then for the share of the recyclate sale, so things like plastic bottles, aluminium cans, etc., there's a further just shy of 1.7 million. So what that was saying was there was about £5 million worth of savings / revenue within the residual waste currently. Well, this was last year. And what you can see there on the right-hand side, you can see the tonnages that were there. And actually the bottom one is the kind of main one. You're saying if you get every single thing out of that recyclate, you go from having nearly 69,000 tonnes of waste to having just over there 26,000 tonnes of waste. So quite considerable drop in waste. So what we're doing now is we presented that to the councils. And often the councils went off and looked at initiatives to try and retrieve that. So what we then said was we would then revisit this later on and redo the sampling to see has anything changed, see if any council initiatives have worked or have any resident behaviours changed. So that sampling is underway at the moment. But what we've done as a kind of precursor to that is just to kind of tee you up for getting those results in the next few weeks, is we've applied those historical percentages to the current waste flow forecasts for the three councils, just to see how relevant those savings are. And it's worth noting that obviously things for like recyclate sales and values, they go up and down in the market. So they were based on the prices at the time. We've now based this on the prices at this time. And you see there's still just shy of £4.7 million worth of savings in there. So what we're doing at the moment, that physical sampling is being undertaken again currently, covering the different rounds within the three councils. We will then pull all of the new data together, apply it into this model, and that will tell the councils, has anything improved? Is there anything different? What materials are within there? What savings could be made? And we've also added a different category into it this time where we're separating out the materials that Flex Collect could collect. So that will then give the councils an idea of how much of that material is within the current waste stream. So these numbers on this slide are just an update of those historic ones with the current waste flow forecast. And let's say we will be producing a report for members in the next few weeks, which demonstrate the new flow forecast. And then what we're hoping to do from that, obviously, is that will allow the councils to identify certain areas where there's certain materials that may be an issue. They can then produce some initiatives, work on some comms or some other types of collection issues that can help bring those materials out and get the residents to put them in the appropriate bin or bring them to the household waste recycling centres. And because we're doing it by round, the collection rounds, the councils will be able to identify certain areas. So it won't just be a generic, this is what happens in Wokingham or Reading. You'll know exactly in the different areas what the breakdown is. And hopefully that will help provide some education and, let's say, some initiatives that can bring those out, which obviously then bring out good cost savings, good recycling initiatives, etc., etc. In the background, what we're doing is obviously, as it stands, we can only deal with the material when it comes to us and as it comes to us. So we've got the recycling plant there, which I think a few of the members have visited. We're investing or looking to invest in some new technology. We've already invested in some robotic technology, and we're looking at further technology so that we can really ensure that that plant is working as efficiently as possible and making sure that it gets every type of recycler that we can. And we're also working with off-takers or recycling companies to see if there's any new materials that we can add into that. So things like the Flex Collect trial is good, and we're also seeing how we can kind of get those new types of materials and what else is coming up on the market so that we can capture those. So there's quite a lot going on there, and there'll be a few actions coming out of that. But we look forward to presenting those results to you when we get them. So then where does that take us? So Oliver and myself, and I'm sure the members have been talking about kind of zero landfill for some kind of, for quite some time. And as it stands at the moment, there's about 13,000 tonnes of material via the RE3 partnership, which is landfilled. And a lot of that is bulky materials, fly tip materials, etc., etc. Now, some of that has been covered by new legislation, which means that particularly soft furnishings have to be diverted to energy from waste because they contain persistent organic pollutants. That list of materials is likely to increase. So by virtue of legislation, some of that will have to be diverted. But we're looking at ways of getting more of that material out of landfill and how it has to be processed for either recycling or energy recovery. Because if it goes for energy recovery, there's a lot of processing that needs to go through. It has to be shredded. It has to be blended with other material because it has a certain calorific value in the way it burns. So it's not just as simple as just sending it all to energy recovery. Equally, we want to look at partners to see if there's any recyclable material within that we can be removed as well. So we're now looking at a solution of the potential of developing a a shredding facility either within the RE3 catchment area or at an existing FCC facility not too far away, where we can do that work and hopefully deliver that additional save and additional diversion to the councils. And as you'll see there, currently we have 70,000 tonnes of energy recovery secured as part of the partnership. At the moment, there's not quite enough waste to hit those 70,000 tonnes. And equally, if we are able to work on initiatives and bring that recycling out of the residual waste, then that means we'll have more capacity at energy from waste, which hopefully we could utilise with some of this material that's currently going to landfill. Obviously worth noting that we do manage some asbestos, and at the moment asbestos obviously has to go to landfill. So could we achieve 100% landfill diversion? No, not while we're handling asbestos, but we could get very close to that. As I say, at the moment as it stands, there's a potential that the partnership could achieve 99% diversion. So currently diversion rates are around about the 94 to 95%, so already a very good performance across the 3 councils. And as I say, if we could get to that point where we are recycling and recovering all of the material, the only thing that would be landfilled currently would be asbestos, unless of course any legislation changes on that. So as I said, we're looking at the potential to develop a shredding facility either within the 3 council areas or at a different facility. We're then looking to maximise the collections of recycling, meaning more materials are recycled. That means reduced costs for the councils, increased diversion, so better carbon footprint, etc., etc. We're looking to build on the reuse proposition. So we've had a number of reuse pop-up shops. We're looking to hold another reuse pop-up shop in October this year. We're also working with Sue Ryder still and working with some other local companies to divert as much reuse as possible. We're obviously looking to be at the forefront of technology within our MRF. So we're looking again at the best types of extraction techniques for new materials. And what we're trying to get is get RE3 to be the partnership that can lead the way for the other local authorities. So there's a lot of work to do there, but actually the benefits to the councils could be very significant. So moving on to my final topic, which is a topic which is quite real at the moment, but just some stats ahead of where I talk about. So we're talking about vapes and batteries and the fires within our industry, and there's some numbers here which surprised me when I read them about the amount of single-use vapes that are bought per month in the UK. So you can see there are 30 million single-use vapes within the UK every month, which is a number which I find quite staggering. And if you look at that, only 17% of people say that they recycle them. You've got 3 million which are hoarded at home because people theoretically don't know what to do with them, so there's cupboards full of them. But 73% of those users say that they just throw away their vapes. So that goes into residual waste at the curbside, litter bins, or just on the street as litter. So that equates to about 5 million vapes across the UK. So you can see it's a big issue. And within the waste industry, there's 700 fires a year, which can be linked back to batteries and vapes, which the problem with when they get damaged, they cause fire, and obviously that's a big issue for us. So looking at that in Reading as it stands at the moment, or in RE3 rather, so far year to date we've had 8 fires, which we can pretty much link back to either batteries or vapes within the waste. Now, thankfully and luckily, we were able to extinguish these fires without too much disruption. We have had the fire brigade on site 3 times to extinguish fires. And you can see there the picture at the top right there, that's a fire at Smallmead. You can see quite a lot of smoke there. But what that actually means is, of course, that's material that was destined for the MRF to be reprocessed and sold. That once it's caught on fire or it's wet with water, it can't be processed and sold. So you can see there's been a significant loss of revenue so far year to date, circa £75,000. There's some damage, some minor damage and to equipment, so £5,000 worth of damage. But what we're really worried about is a large incident and what it could happen. Obviously, there could be harm to the humans and the people that work there, but the disruption to the service could be absolutely significant and catastrophic. We've already seen elsewhere within industry where facilities have burnt down, and that means that vehicles can't tip there, so collection vehicles can't complete their rounds, or they have to go to further places to tip. That could cause problems. Vehicles might not have the range to get there. Members of public could be only using one facility, so if Smallmead were to burn down or anything happened there, everything would be diverted to Longshot and vice versa. So that could cause significant disruption and cost for the councils. And you can see there, particularly fires in vehicles is quite prevalent as well. And you can imagine a fire in a dust cart is not good, but if you have an electric vehicle, if they catch fires, that can be quite dangerous. So we need to do something. What could we do? Well, unfortunately, we can't wave a magic wand and make this disappear. But what we need to do is increase the engagement with the communities and residents regarding these dangers. There's lots of campaigns out there already. There's lots of take charge campaigns, demon batteries, etc. If we could utilise those campaigns and really push that, we can accept batteries and vapes at the household recycling centres. Can we promote that further? Could we look at potential drop-off points at the universities, libraries and council facilities? FCC are already engaged with Reading University to see if we can do anything with them in partnership to have some drop-off bins put within the university for the students. Because if you look at the population of students, a lot of them don't drive, so they can't take them to the recycling centres. They're looking for a convenient way to get rid of them. That convenient way for them at the moment is just to put them in the bin. So what we want to try and do is come up with some initiatives with the councils that we can provide some drop-off points for these, or we can recycle them and get them out of the waste stream to prevent those large fires and dangerous incidents. And you can see there at the bottom, that's an issue with a vape that exploded in a recycling plant. Now, those of you that have been to a plant, this thankfully wasn't at our plant, but it was at one very similar to ours, and that set off like a firework and shot all around the cabin. You can imagine when you've got 7 or 8 people working in there, that's quite a dangerous situation, something which we really, really, really need to avoid. We want to do something. We want to work with the councils to try and get these out of the waste and do something before we have a major incident. And that concludes what I've got for you. So, any questions?
Thank you very much, Rory, for that. Some very insightful information. Can I ask if members have any questions? I've got a dead tie here, but I'm going right straight across to Councillor Shenton first, and then Councillor Templeton.
Thank you, Chair. I'd be very interested to know how we compare to other authorities in compositional analysis, if there's any data that we can actually access, and similarly how we compare to other authorities in percentage sent to landfill. If there's any data that we can get hold of, I'd be very interested to see that as a comparison.
Thank you. Can I take the second question and then, Councillor Templeton.
Yeah, thank you. I would like to consider whether we can get the people who sell the vapes to take a collection point outside their shops or whatever, because people go back in there to buy them if they're not buying online, and they could drop the used ones. But it also worries me about what happens to the fire if you've got a whole bucket full of these vapes, because if one goes off, and we saw the picture there, if one goes off and it's a whole bucket full, then that energy will set fire to all the others as well, and then we'll have a major fire somewhere. So it is quite important where these recycling vape points are, because if they're near a library or something else, we could have massive fires in our localities.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from members? No. Okay. Yes. Councillor Kerr.
Well, there's a couple of questions. Do you want me to wait until those first two have been answered, or just go for them?
Go ahead.
Okay.
Roy, if you can take that, then yeah. Okay.
Okay, so firstly, I wanted to ask about the first part and the options for, I find that staggering, what, £5 million of potential saving. I presume that's across the whole partnership and not per council. But the shredding facility, I just want to understand a little bit more about where is our nearest one currently, and what other local authorities are likely to use one in our area if we were to sell that, and the potential I mean, I know you've got figures, but there's a market for this, obviously. So I'd like to understand the potential of that financially. On the vape side of things, I find this completely shocking. Is government doing anything about this in terms of, I know that we've talked separately about deposit return schemes, but is that something that government could be doing to encourage them to go back to the store they bought and they get money off the next one for actually returning their original one or something like that as an incentive? I mean, other than obviously doing a communications campaign, which I think is important that we do, and we can talk about that when we debate this later. I'm wondering what levers government have on this to encourage the right behaviours.
I'll take one more question. I've made notes in case you forget. Councillor Terry. Good.
Okay. Thanks, Rory. Sorry about that. I suppose I was just interested about the shredding and processing stuff, because obviously the problem we've got about POPs is that, you know, for us, like, our bulky waste has become more challenging as a process because we've got to separate those out and everything. So I just wasn't clear. I've decided if we have a processing plant operation nearby somewhere, all of our collections could just go there and be shredded and sorted, or do we still have to separate them at the point of collection? Because that makes a kind of big difference to me in terms of what I feel about it. The other thing is that, you know, if you think it's going to benefit us, is FCC going to come back and say, where's your contribution, councils? And you didn't say anything about that. Are you being clear that if you're looking for somewhere to do the processing, you're doing that because FCC thinks it's good for it and is going to invest in that all on its own? So those are a couple of things on that. I think the looking at the, you know, what is in the bins and so on is really helpful. But it's kind of promoting to us something. I've been around this block a few times. You know, 5 million is something that we can use to sell to people about the fact that this is how much your waste is costing. We won't necessarily see that all back. So, for example, recyclates, the value of them fluctuates. So you're using a fixed, price at a point in time. And as we can see, even between the 2 years you've estimated, it's changed, hasn't it? So it's not gone up, it's gone down. So I just want to put a bit of caution in that. I mean, I think it's right in terms of just saying to us, look, if your residents has behaved better or differently. I suppose finally, I didn't remember because it went quite quickly, the amount of wood. I mean, is there ever going to be a case for curbside collection of wood? Because lots of people do just break things up and stick them in the black bin, rather than, they're not often big enough to take to the recycling centres, it's not worth the journey. So they're just sort of, if it's a smaller item of wood, they're just going to break it up, stick it in their black bin. And I wondered about that. So there's quite a few things, sorry. I hope somebody is keeping tabs for you.
Very good. In deference, I will not be asking any questions since most of my questions have been addressed by colleagues here, and will help you along in case you've forgotten anything.
I think we've got 3 on composition and 3 on vapes.
Yes. I'll do my best to remember them in any particular order. So, picking up, and apologies, I think you asked the first question, and that was around composition. I can't remember exactly what
it's
that...
about whether there's comparison.
Comparison.
Oh, yeah, that's right, yeah. So I think there is data out there, and obviously it depends upon what local authorities do, how they sell that data. But I think via the LGA, there may well be access to that data. We will certainly see if there's anything that we've got that we can share that would show you how comparable that is on a like-for-like basis. But that may be better sourced through things like the local government and ADEPT and things. In terms of vapes, you mentioned about potential take-back schemes and obviously containers. So covering off the containers, so yeah, I agree. If you've got something that's dangerous, you don't want a big pile of them. So the containers that are used are specifically designed, and they have material within them, so that should minimise any danger to them exploding. The problem, or the main issue with vapes and batteries, why they explode, is when they become damaged. So particularly, you can imagine for a processing or going in the back of a dust cart, getting crushed. That's where the issue happens, when they're damaged. So if they're in a special sealed container that has some material within it, that should minimise that risk. I think the government are looking potential extended producer responsibility packages for these vapes, and I know quite a few organisations have lobbied the government to ban these single-use vapes. There are now starting to be a couple of waste companies that are looking or have developed some kind of low-scale take-back schemes, so we're looking to see if we can partner with those, and that is working with that end user. But because it's kind of a market that really took off quite quickly, the infrastructure and the process hasn't really caught up to get there, but we are working at that. So, but it's certainly we don't want to put danger into libraries and universities and those sorts of things. I think then picking up on a couple of things that you mentioned, again about waste composition analysis, I think was some of them.
I can clarify. It was about if we had our own shredding facility and where our nearest one is currently, and what opportunity is there to bring in income from elsewhere.
Yeah. Okay, so currently the POPs material that is shredded and processed is done at an existing FCC facility in Oxfordshire. So what we are looking at some proposals, and it kind of ties in with the other questions, is we're looking at two potential options. One is if there was an option within RE3 itself to either jointly develop a facility, so between the council and FCC, or the council on their own. There's lots of material around, so if you look at the local authorities nearby, so we work with quite a few of the neighbouring authorities, so Oxfordshire themselves, so we're doing a lot of work with Oxfordshire, so they're looking for homes for their material. We know Wiltshire Council are. Oliver and myself have spoken to Swindon Council quite recently. So there's lots of material, and there's also lots of trade waste companies within the local community, so commercial organisations that are looking for those facilities as well. So we're doing some analysis on what we think is out there, what we could potentially capture, what those costs would be, and then kind of consider whether that is an option to have a facility nearby, or whether that is the existing facility in Oxfordshire, whether we send everything there, and then what that might look like. So it could be a joint venture between all three parties. It could be an FCC venture. I think we're looking at costing that up and then presenting that to the council so that actually there's some options for either or. And I think there was one final question about wood and collections from the curbside. I suppose the councils currently do offer bulky collections, so I suppose there is some kind of service. I think again the difficulty is if you look at it, I'm sure the people aren't breaking up massive wardrobes and putting them in. It might just be small amounts if they've got a small piece of wood or chopping board or something like that. I don't know how cost effective a collection service from the curbside would be, but it may be worth looking at whether there's kind of one-off collections over certain periods of time that could be made. But I don't know anywhere else in the UK that offer a kind of specific kind of wood-only collection service.
I didn't see the figures, and I'm sure they're not very high, but they do feature in your presentation about what you're finding in residual waste. So that's why I asked about wood, because you do pull that out particularly, don't you? So, I mean, so I'm sure it isn't enough to justify curbside, quite frankly. We don't even do glass in Reading yet, but that's because our bring banks have been successful. But it's just one of those, how do you really pull it out? These will be items that are not big enough or come up often enough to, or they want to do the bulky waste. If they can't get a slot, which with the pop stuff we've been having problems with, they're going to chop it up and put it in the bin.
We have got the wood figure, and I'll dig that out and send that to you, but we have got it separated with that. I mean, it wasn't a massive figure in comparison to some of the things like food waste and green waste, but it was a reasonable number.
Thank you. Do members feel that their questions were addressed appropriately? Okay, very good. I just might suggest also that some of the things that you discussed actioning about the comparisons going to the LGA, possibly what kind of ongoing lobbying we can do, perhaps in terms of the government, about the responsibility with the vape situation, knowing the impacts that that's going to have on our insurance and everything else, too, would be done. And possibly if these slides could be shared to members, is that agreeable? Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. They have been. Thank you. So with that, we will go on to the progress report, and I do ask that members be mindful of the fact that we have got a closed session portion of this that we would like to get to as quickly as possible, so we'll have time to discuss that. So,
Sorry, I wasn't-
yes, Councillor Kerr.
So I wasn't sure about that last report. We've obviously asked our questions. Have we actually decided on some specific actions that we want to happen out of this? And I just want to be clear that we're happy with what we're asking to be done. I wanted to ask that at a future meeting, we had two separate reports. One of them around vapes. I think this is actually a high risk thing for the RE3 partnership, particularly with the insurance and obviously the safety. And I'd just like to ask at the appropriate time that we could have a very specific report that looks at our different options in a bit more detail, costs things up, just brings in a bit more data and a bit more information, what's going on, what other people are doing about lobbying, where we're seeing the government going. I just think we need more information for us to look at a way forward, because this is such a huge risk to the organisation. So I just want to make sure there's proper recommendations and actions to come from that.
Chair, thank you. Yeah. Can I just ask Councillor Kerr, what was the second one? That was the vapes. What?
Sorry, and then we talked about shredding facility and what would happen. I just want to make sure we've actually got specific action that we are, as a board, going to get a report with it all detailed out, looking at the different models that could be delivered and options that we could look at. So I know we discussed it, but we never actually explicitly asked for a report. So.
Thank you, Councillor Kerr. I do believe that those will be minuted, and I do believe that we'll have a further conversation also about ensuring that there's a bit more action highlighting within the minutes, if we can certainly take that discussion off and make sure that those things are brought forward. I know that this report is also obviously going to be discussed throughout, and these are common themes that we're probably not likely to forget, but I do thank you for your points on that, and I agree. Yes, so if we could move on to item 8, the progress report. Okay, very good. So the progress report at item 8, which we will find on page 11, and the party that will be delivering that will be Sarah Ennis. So.
Thank you. Yes, so in terms of the progress report, we've started with our usual review of the performance statistics. So you'll have seen in the report that I've presented the provisional recycling rate figures for April to August of this year and compared them with April to September of last year. You'll have noticed that the recycling rates for all 3 councils have gone up. That's largely a result of more garden waste received during a wet summer. In contrast, we have seen some other recyclable tonnages go down, most notably the food waste. And I know that Jane is going to pick up some of the implications of the changing tonnages later in the meeting. Also in the report, I've noted about the waste compositional analysis, but as we've just heard from Rory on that one, I won't go through that again. Just to say that we do plan to come back to you at your next meeting in January with a report about actions to increase the recycling rate.
Thank you to the officer for that. Obviously, members have read the progress report, and I would like to ask if there are any questions to officers on that. It's a big, it's a big report, but could you please also notify, or at least in any questions you've got, please just highlight which sections or anything like that. That's very helpful for the officers. So we'll be taking questions now to that report. Councillor Kerr.
Thank you, Chair. On the HWRC charges, I wanted to understand if there is any hint of any additional funding from government for this. If we're being asked to, obviously this is going to have a financial impact on us, is there any financial support coming at all? The other thing I wanted to ask about is the WeBanks, and obviously reading that no one bid. I just want to understand what that actually means in terms of procurement, because surely the organisation that we're looking at going with, I just find it very odd that they didn't actually put a bid in, and what that means for the procurement process and the level of scrutiny. So yeah, it's WeBanks and the HWRC charges.
Thank you. Are there any other questions at this time? Sarah, why don't you go ahead and answer those? Perhaps people will have other questions.
Okay, yes, so in regards to the question on DIY waste and funding, my understanding is that no, there won't be any additional funding from government. In regards to the question about procurement, so yes, as you say, we didn't get any bids from any companies. I've spoken to the company that we initially worked with regards to putting in our funding application. And part of the reason they didn't bid apparently was, well, it relates to the branding of the banks. So Material Focus, who are going to provide the funding, need the banks branded in a particular way. The company that we were planning to work with would normally use their own branding on the banks. And so that's caused a little bit of a problem. So we're currently trying to find a potential way forward in relation to that. If we can find a way forward, my intention would be to apply for another waiver from the corporate procurement rules. And really the reason for that being is that Material Focus are hoping for us to get a project underway by the end of the year. So we are now rather short of time. So yes, I think probably a waiver might be the only way forward if we want to retain that funding.
Yes, Councillor Kerr, if you have a follow-up question on that.
Thank you. If that's why this particular organisation didn't then put in a bid, do we know, well, I guess we won't know, will others have felt the same and not bid because of that? And as a result, we're not getting a good spread of potential businesses for actually doing this properly. I appreciate we've got time constraints here, but I'm concerned that if that's the reason that they've cited, does that apply to others as well? And do we know, and are we aware of other organisations in this field that could have bid for it?
I really don't think we know, Councillor, what those reasons would be, and I don't think it would be appropriate for us, perhaps, for me to guess in trying to answer you. I think, Sarah, we can try and test that out and try and find out. I don't think there was anything untoward in terms of the procurement process at all. It was a usual procurement under all the kind of sort of not constraints, but with the kind of structure around it that you would expect. I think we're just going to have to, as Sarah said, explore what the reasoning is with the particular provider that was lined up, and if we can find anything else out about sort of post-procurement learning, then we can certainly feed that back.
And just to be clear, I'm not suggesting at all, sorry.
Councillor Kerr, could you just please remember to go through? Yep, sorry.
Sorry. No, just to be clear, I'm not suggesting for a moment that there's anything untoward with the procurement process. That's not what I'm saying at all. And I appreciate you're not going to know what you don't know, but I guess the fear is that we could have had several come forward and we haven't for whatever reason, and we know of a reason. This puts the ball in their court, though. That's the problem, knowing that we don't have anyone else to go to. So are we actually going to be getting best value for money through this is my concern.
If, Sarah, if you could perhaps, if the officer could perhaps follow up on that item, and then I will take a question from Councillor Temperton.
Yes, I don't think I have anything to add.
Fine, understood. Thank you. And I think the point has been made on that. Councillor Temperton, please.
Yeah, mine's a bit of a follow-up on that, really, because obviously you want a local firm to do this, because that's what it says in here. But do other areas, other like Oxfordshire and others, are they all doing this, and they've got contractors that are prepared to do it?
So we are aware of some neighbouring councils that operate WeBank collections. They all currently, well, the ones that I'm aware of, work with this local company that we have identified. Yes, so my understanding is that generally it would only be a local company that would bid for work like this, because obviously if you are further away, you've got more transport costs, it makes things more expensive. So yes, we were aware that when we went to the procurement exercise that potentially we weren't going to get huge numbers of companies interested. Yeah.
Great. Do members have any other questions? Yes, Councillor Shenton.
Just briefly, given what we've just heard about vapes and the quantity of vapes, is there a risk that the WeBanks will be inundated with single-use vapes?
Well, so we would need to make a decision on which company we're working with, and then depending on their policy for whether they accept vapes or not, we would obviously plan our communications accordingly. I know that the company we were planning to work with had initially told us they would accept vapes in the banks, and they were happy that that would be a safe disposal route for them. We would need to check that again, obviously, if we were to go ahead. But yeah, something for us to consider.
Thank you, Councillor Shenton. You know, I also share your concerns on that. If I may, I would like to ask a question moving along in the report in regards to the review of the HWRC charges and the officers bringing options available, especially in charge of in relation to the list of chargeable DIY items and how we're going to deal with that with the government guidance on that situation. And so that we will have options in January. And I wanted to know if there's any more detailing that you could provide on that at this time. Thank you.
Yes, so there are potentially a number of options and things that we can look into and report to you in January. The main one I've started looking into at the moment is talking to the provider of our booking system to see if there is potentially a route there through which we could monitor the deposits of construction and demolition waste and use that as a way to identify which ones would be chargeable and which ones would be free of charge. Because obviously you'll have seen in the report that there's going to be a level under which people can bring in waste free of charge, and if they come in more frequently than the sort of set threshold, then we will have the option to charge. So yeah, looking to see whether there's a technical solution through which we are actually able to monitor this has been sort of first route. And yes, we should hopefully have some detail for you in January alongside some other options should you want to consider those.
Great, thank you very much for that. And I do think that that's going to be another thing that we'll have to obviously be grappling with. If there are no more questions from members, can I go back and formally ask that we agree with the recommendations at section 2.1, that members note the content of this report, and at section 2.2, which relates to section 5.1 to 5.4 of this report, that we are actually all agreed with the guidance on approving the rescheduling of this AGM to be at the summer meeting of the RA3 board from 2024 onwards, which mostly reflects our reassortments on an annual basis too. Are members all agreed on that? And can I see a clear indication by raising of hands? Okay, very good. Thank you. That is unanimous. With that, we will move on to agenda item 9, the communications report. And Oliver, if I am clear, that would be Monica. So thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So in regards to communication activities, just want to update members on the progress towards certain activities that's been undertaken in recent months. Members should recall the previous meetings where we discussed the moving into the new recycling app called Scrub. The works in that progressed. We are at the moment in the final stages of the sharing relevant data with provider and hoping to receive app ready for testing fairly soon. This should hopefully bring us to a good timing to start developing and sharing some promotional materials ready for promoting it wider towards to residents. And we're hoping that we could start doing this from the late October, early November. Simultaneously, the provider is engaging with the IT teams from the each councils to ensure that the feature that we all been kind of looking for, like the notification reminders, are being added on time, and this is progressing well as well. There were some concerns about the moving and ensuring that residents are having still access to the current app, and that has been negotiated positively as well. So residents will be able to still access the current app at least until January. So it gives us a good contingency plans just in case for some reason we are not fully satisfied with the current app. In regards to the virtual tours as well, the project has progressed well. We are already engaged with the provider to create a set of photos, and we're building the tours. Hopefully we will get the final product to us delivered fairly shortly, and this will be shared as soon as possible. And that includes recycling centers tour as well as material recycling facility, hoping to be added to our portfolio of the materials that we can use to further promote the service to residents. Progress report indicated a few projects that it's been ongoing. One of them is plastic bag and recycling trial. My update here is just to complement it in regards to the communication activities that has been going really well. Following announcement during the last board meeting, the subject received a quite wide coverage in the media. Equally locally and national and trade media were interested in that trial, which fairly positive, and thank you so much for all of the members to actively engaging and participating in promotion of that trial. We have announced the project as well last week to media, and equally received a similar response with the news featured in the national media as well. Just the potentially a more detailed thing, as we decided that we want to continue obviously engaging with the participants of the trial. We're going to do it via the route, more targeted role as well. So on an ongoing basis, we're using Nextdoor app, so it's a localized app. And also we are specifically created a Facebook group as well for participants. That should enable us to gather a relevant feedback or any comments from residents ready to be able to have a smooth stage 2 of the project. Podbug service, just a reminder that has been ongoing and going very well. We are regularly promoting this on our channels. We have very good response, containers feeling really, really well. So it seems like all of the residents, not all, but some of the residents who are obviously using coffee pods, hopefully using the service, and we are quite pleased with how it is going. Next update, just short one on the food waste communications. As we have heard, numbers of the food waste dropped. So just to complement on that is just to remind everyone that all of our council teams and communications teams are having food waste messages on the top priority list that has been ongoing throughout the summer as well, and we're planning to increase some communication on that going forward. As one of the potential route we could take is my current discussion with the New Direction College, that's the adult training center here in Reading, but also covering Berkshire. They having courses related to food, and they will be more than happy to engage with us to create some webinars that would hopefully create a bit more creative way of talking about the food waste to not only obviously their members, but also widely, because we can promote it a bit outside of the group classes. So hopefully that collaboration could bring some further benefits. With the general activities, members might note just a few campaigns that are being undertaken. I'm regularly feeding lots of information that is available to us. One of them most recently is the focus on foil. And want to also say that the Recycle Week this year will take place in October, 16th of October. This is usually a very good time to enhance the communications. There will be a lot of focus on that nationally, so all of the teams are aware of that, and will be placing regular updates related to recycling within that week. And perhaps just a short reminder that I'm organizing material recycling facility tours for all members. This has been scheduled for September and October. One of the tours already took place, which was received pretty positively. And please make a note of that. And if you feel that some of the members from your council are interested, I will share a link for registration again following that meeting. Thank you so much, Chair.
Thank you to the officer very much for that information. May I ask, and bearing in mind to members and colleagues here, in deference to time, could we please limit questions? But are there any questions? You have explained very well, so I thank you for that. Yes, Councillor Kerr.
It's not a question, it's just a comment on the 5.7 with regards to the respective council IT teams and getting all the API connection done. I just wanted to say from a Wokingham perspective, so I have IT in my portfolio. We've just done a major brand new website, which is the cause of the delay. We've had to stop or postpone other activity until that was on board, but that has gone live now. So, but do give us a shout if there's anything further needed.
Thank you. That's brilliant to hear. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Then there being no other questions that I can see, can I ask that members, by a show of hands, please note the contents of this report. Thank you very much. And let us move on to agenda item 10, which that will be coming from Oliver Burt to my left.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be quick. The report on the Environment Act is set into three parts. I'm going to focus on the second two, really, just in terms of giving you a verbal introduction. The first part, the first of those two, is about the deposit return scheme, and members are asked, following on from previous reports on this, where the board considered some of the potential implications from DRS to both councils in terms of contractual and income implications, detriments, and some access issues that we noted for residents, particularly those that would have access issues, either disability or age perhaps. And there are some actions at 517 which members are asked to give a sort of a recommendation on, or to make a recommendation on, around whether there's any more action we want to take on those to follow up. So that's the DRS, and that follows on from earlier reports. And then the final part of this report is around what was called waste collection consistency, and as of yesterday, has now been termed simpler recycling. And this is following the Prime Minister's announcements on some environmental actions. And I've circulated to members the statement that has been put out last night by DEFRA, which sort of explains that what we were looking for in terms of waste collection consistency is going to be replaced by this new approach called simpler recycling. I don't think there's anything more I can say on that at the moment. And we will await, as we were, in fairness, as we were waiting for the detail on waste collection consistency, we will await the detail on simpler recycling. The one question for members really is around, in view of that uncertainty, whether or not members would like officers between now and the next meeting to undertake the actions that we have proposed and any others that they want to propose themselves that are listed at 539, that are intended to help inform both the councils and the board as to decisions we should make around glass collections. That was something that was raised earlier. That's the particular area where the councils at the moment would not have previously complied wholly with the waste collection consistency regime. Again, we have to wait and see what simpler recycling looks like. But there are a list of actions there, and I think that's probably the maximum that I can say at the moment, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And obviously, we will be asking for questions for clarification on this report in the first, but then specifically I would ask that members address the actions at 5.17 in regarding to the deposit return scheme and the suggestions made there, and then also actions on the, especially the glass collections, 5.36 to 5.39. So may I ask for questions of clarification? Thank you, Councillor Kerr.
Thanks. I just wanted to ask about the glass collection. Is it, I don't believe it is anymore, but correct me if I'm wrong, does it matter about colours of glass being separated out? I certainly understand in the past that part of the difficulty was the different qualities of glass. So I'd like to just understand the consequences of that. And I guess this probably won't happen until a more detailed analysis, but do we know generally if the cost to actually collect curbside can be recovered by the resale of that glass with what extra we could collect? Oh, and sorry, one other thing. I think it was roughly a 70-30 split, I remember, 70% of glass being in the collection bags and 30% in residual waste. I'm not sure if we have this level of detail, but when we do the compositional analysis of the bags, do we know that those that do throw away glass are throwing away other recyclable materials? I guess what I'm trying to understand is are we actually going to recover that 30% of glass by having a separate collection point if these are the people that are putting all sorts of recycling in the residual waste anyway, or are these, yeah, I think you get what I mean by the question.
Thank you. Oliver.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of the glass questions, I don't think we will be able to analyse the data we collect back to the extent that would be able to kind of cross-refer one type of recycling with another through this analysis. So I don't think we'll be able to know that. However, I suppose the purpose of a glass collection from residents is the same as any other collection that the councils might offer. It's about convenience. It's about providing a service perhaps to those people that don't have access. It goes back to that point really around the DRS. Whether or not we can afford the cost of the collection from the sale of the glass, I would doubt. I don't think that the value of the material is such that it would ever be able to cover that cost. And that was really one of the drivers, I suppose, behind the previous waste collection consistency plan for there being processor or the people that put the producer sort of money coming in to pay for the product they put on the market. So I will say almost certainly no, the cost of the glass wouldn't pay for it. And I suppose if it did, we probably would be in a position to say, well, we can go it alone on ourselves and we can use that money and potentially make a decision to say we can just do it. The fact that we have waited is a factor of that uncertainty around where that funding would come from government. And again, we're probably in no worse position this morning than we were yesterday, in that we just don't know. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Temperton.
Yeah, a quick one. From my visit to RE3, I think you can't put glass in the blue box, in the recyclable. It can't be recycled along with all the others. It can't be picked out. So therefore, we would have to have another box. So who pays for the other bin? And if we're not getting any money from the government, then that puts a lot of extra cost onto each of the councils. And also, I live in an estate where another bin would actually cause hell, because there is nowhere to move now when the bins are all out on the all collection day, and it would be very difficult. So I am just wondering, what is the timescale on this, and do we think it will really happen?
Oliver, if I could take a question from Councillor Terry so you could address both. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it does relate. I mean, I suppose I keep reading this report and it's just full of uncertainty. And there's no indication of anywhere, given the Prime Minister's statement yesterday, that we're getting any clarity at all. I guess in terms of thinking about the glass actions, we all know that for all sorts of reasons we'd quite like to move to curbside recycling of glass, because it's heavy, not least of all. But our bring backs work very well. And given the discussions we're going to have later about financing and costs and current position of council's budgets, it doesn't feel like I'm, moved to take any action on whether we pick up glass yet or not, because it's just not something that's quite affordable without further information. And the risk is that the Prime Minister's speech was, the headlines, and the detail will come, and the detail in simplifying, recycling will be some new requirement on how we have to collect glass, which just isn't said, because he wouldn't be saying that. It'll come in the detail that we get later. So I'm hesitant, not forever, and it's not that I don't think we need to tackle this particular issue. I just feel that there's such an absence of clear information and a guidance, and including any possibility of funding to support changes that we might need to make. I don't feel inclined to instruct the officers to do anything particular at the moment. I think we might need to wait and have a report next time that does update us if anything new has emerged, but very difficult to make any kind of decisions for the future in the way that this government has behaved in terms of this Environment Act.
Thank you. Oliver, could you come back on those points?
Thank you, Chair. I'll just answer Councillor Kerr's point around coloured glass, because I forgot to answer that the first time round. No problem at all. The sorting technology that they use at the glass sorting plant is exactly the same or very similar to the sorting we have at ours. It uses photospectrometry to determine between different colours of bits of broken glass. So actually they find that that's actually an easier way, apparently, for them to sort that glass out rather than it being sorted by the public in different banks. So that's that first question. To Councillor Temperton, in terms of another bin and everything, you'll be pleased to note in the statement in front of you that the government is protecting your residents from having 7 bins, which was a risk they were never going to have in the first place. But it is a real issue around how we add another collection on. And you're right to say at the moment that separate glass collection would be required. And I'm saying that, I suppose, from the previous planning that existed under waste collection consistency, we can only assume that would still apply going forward in this new plan. The reason for that is a practical one. There is still quite a lot of fibre, by that I mean newspaper and particularly cardboard, that we collect through our collections. And broken glass in the back of a compaction vehicle with that fibre renders the fibre unrecyclable. Ground glass makes that very, very difficult. So the legislation as it's drafted at the moment and the plans that we thought were going to come through, and I'm sure will be the same, would require glass and paper, although fibre products, to be collected separately all the time. In theory, we could collect plastics, cans and glass together, and there are figures in the report which tell us how much that would cost in terms of re-engineering our current plant, something like about £4.5 million if we wish to do that. And part of the report says, should we look at those costs and see whether or not a business case can be put forward? And I think that possibly then takes us on to Councillor Terry's question, which is really members are the proposal that's been put forward is really for officers to look across the piece at what other councils are doing, which was a point that Councillor Shenton made previously, to see if we can lobby government to find out any certainty. And I think yesterday's announcement probably means that's not door closed, but it's only ajar probably. They may not be prepared to release anything else out, and just to begin as councils potentially costing up what a glass collection might look at, not necessarily as a precursor for a decision, but for the councils to be in a position to be able to have some clarity about what we as three councils in a partnership wish to do. So I completely agree with the point you make. I don't think a decision on that is imminent. It's just around making sure we furnish ourselves with all the information we need. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Shenton, yes.
I have a brief request rather than a question, and that is any work that's done on the cost of glass collections should also involve the environmental cost of glass collection, because the RCVs would be running from property to property with an ever-increasing load, which increases the emissions of the collection, and I would like to see how that works into the equation as well.
Oliver.
Definitely. Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that, and we will include that in any work we do.
Members, are there any other questions? I think that, yes, Councillor Temperton.
On the 517, I actually thought this had died a death. I just thought that they weren't really very keen on returning because it would cost all the residents and everything else, and the shopkeepers were going to push it onto everything. So I thought all the argument was that this wasn't going to happen. Am I wrong?
Oliver.
Thank you, Chair. I think the only thing I can say, Councillor, is I'm afraid I don't know. And I don't think we know. I don't think anyone knows. I think the announcement yesterday, it would be impossible. We should not infer too much from that. It's talking about the one of the three limbs. It's talking about the waste collection consistency bit, but it is silent on the other two. The extended producer responsibility, which is making the people who put this packaging on the market, making them pay for it. So we could infer from yesterday's statement that bit stands. We could infer from yesterday's statement that DRS still stands because they are untouched by yesterday's statement. But again, that is conjecture. So in the report, we talk about the British Retail Consortium sort of slamming DRS and saying we're not behind it. Again, we could infer from that they're not going to play ball and that it might not work. But again, it is just guesswork. And so the question to members really is, in the absence of any certainty, would you like us as officers to kind of continue pursuing that, to see whether the government would publish its equality impact assessment and to see what other people are doing about it? And in a way, I suppose that's a free hit or a free shot, really, on the part of the RO3 councils. And again, in the spirit of wanting to furnish ourselves with as much information as we possibly can for our own residents, rather than for any other reason, I suppose. But I think you're quite right. It's not looking a healthy position for DRS at the moment. But yeah.
Councillor Terry, you have an
Thank you,
additional
Chair, for letting
question.
me come back. I was talking about glass in particular, but I was widening out. And I mean, my view would be on this deposit return scheme and extended producer responsibility. Actually, perhaps we could ask the officers to write to the appropriate ministers to say, in light of the Prime Minister's statement yesterday, he was silent on these, but perhaps you'd like to clarify whether we need to spend any more time thinking about doing any work on them. I'm sure you'll word them more appropriately than that, Mr. Burt. But you would understand the spirit, I think, in which I believe colleagues would support, saying that we really need to ask for clarification, because we simply cannot run an organisation this way. This has been out there for so long, and our residents, you know, want transparency and honesty. I think they're the words the Prime Minister uses. We'd like to apply them too.
Thank you, Councillor Terry. That, I think, sums it up quite well. And if there are no other questions, I think that what I'm hearing here is that members very much, I think Councillor Terry summed it up very well. Basically, we're left in a quandary here, and we do obviously wish for RE3 to progress information and continuing in the Environment Act report update back to us, to press government where we are able. I would suggest that Councillor Terry's laid out a good general format of exactly how this is going to be affecting us, and getting some clarification on that. So in regards to Section 5.17, I would think that we could say that that might be further lobbying. And also, I do think that 5.17 II about internal surveys could continue to take place if members might be minded on that, so we can continue to try to understand what that is. And then to Section 5.39, that the steps really are just about getting clarity from government and continuing to report back to us. I don't think that, obviously, we've clearly concluded that we are going to be nowhere by January in furthering on glass. So can we ask that those items are tweaked thusly, and can we get an agreement from the board by a show of hands, or is there any? Yeah? Or, okay, we're fine with that. Okay, very good. And those have been noted. Good, super. So we are at the point wherein we go into part 2, the exclusion of public and press. So could I ask that the officers take the necessary steps so that we can enter into the next portion of the meeting?